Right, so day 2, this is your deadlift and carry day. I'm going to start off with a cat-cow stretch or cat-camel. It's described happy cat, sad cat, it's described in various different ways. Now this is a spinal mobilisation, but the purpose of the reason why I'm going to get you to do this is because I want you to understand where neutral spine position is. Now I see a large proportion of athletes, strength athletes, when they get into a position where they're loading the spine, they have a tendency to overextend. It's a really common movement fault. It feels strong and stable because basically at the back of your spine, the bones are resting on top of each other. But alongside those bones that stick out the back, the spinous processes, you've also got your facet joints. You compress the facet joints and you've then got centralised lower back pain. A quick movement change, i.e. get yourself out of this hyperextended position into a more neutral position, and you find that over a couple of days that centralised back pain eases and you can squat and deadlift without any pain whatsoever. So your cat-camel is part mobilisation and it's part about finding the mid position so you understand where neutral spine is. So onto all fours, hands over your shoulders or shoulders over your hands, hips over your knees, and we're going to allow ourselves, our lower backs, to sink towards the floor, and then we're going to slowly arch our back up towards the ceiling. Sink down, arch up. Now to find neutral when you're actually under the bar, whether that's picking it up from the floor or squatting, your neutral spine position is halfway between where your back is arched and where your back is rounded. So neutral spine, as you come through the middle, is about there. So that's where you should be, trying to make sure that when you're picking the bar up from the floor, when you've got the bar on your back and you're squatting, that's the position you're trying to adopt. So we think about keeping the rib cage down and the spine in neutral while we're lifting. So cat-camel for mobilisation, you're going to do one set, 6 to 8 reps, with 1 rep being up and down. So you're going to do that 6 to 8 times. So that's piece number 1. Right, piece number 2. Now, with your deadlift, I think it's more important that we activate rather than mobilise. So the next couple of movements are all about firing up some of those key posterior chain muscles that we're going to recruit in order to create tension that we're going to use to drive the bar off the floor. Now the first thing we're going to do is what we call a frog pump. The next thing we do is a little bit of work for the hamstrings. However, and this is the little caveat here, if you find that your hip mobility limits your range of movement, your ability to be able to get into the hole, so for that first pull, then what I'd encourage you to do is some sort of banded hip distraction. So at this point, if you've done, like you jump onto your deadlift bar and you do a couple of warm-up sets and you think, right, my hips feel stiff and tight, go back into one of the previous blocks, banded hip distraction, where we've tied the band around the squat rack, put it around the inside of the thigh, and we do a banded hip distraction for 30 seconds on the left-hand side and 30 seconds on the right-hand side. Hopefully, because you've spent the last 3 blocks working on your hips, those hip restrictions, those hip mobility issues should have started to lessen, so we can think now less about mobility and more about firing things up. Now frog pump, you may get some strange looks in the gym doing this, a big old strong man doing what you'd class as being glute activation exercises, but trust me when I tell you, you do some of these, you'll get a wicked burn into your glutes, and when you get onto the bar, you'll find that everything's fired and primed. So elbows driven into the floor, fists pointing up towards the ceiling, soles of the feet together, trying to get your heels as close towards your bum as you can, and then we're going to keep our chin onto our chest, and we're going to push up and then relax down, keeping the feet or the knees pushed out. So we're firing up our external rotators, the glutes, the piriformis muscle, all of those hip muscles around the back. And we're going to do 2 sets of 10 reps on our frog pumps. And that's piece number 2. Right, so your final piece. So So far, we've mobilised our lumbar spine, we've found our neutral position, which is the midway point between arched and sort of sunk. It's the flat back position. We've talked about bracing by drawing the rib cage down. We've activated the glutes using our frog pump, and now we're going to do something to try and create both mobilisation and activation around the hip joints. Now these are your hip airplanes. You've probably seen various variations of these done, where people are sort of balancing on one leg, doing all this work here. What I want you to think about is when we're in position, we're going to use our back leg, so we're not having to focus so much on the balance, we're going to focus on the articulation. So this back foot is going to create a little bit of stability. Try and keep as little amount of pressure through that back foot as you can. So again, we're focusing all our force onto the front leg, but the back foot is there, so you're not tottering around and falling all over the place. Now, this front leg, my left leg, I'm going to drive into the floor. So I'm going to put a lot of force through that leg. I'm going to make sure my knee on this front leg stays over my toes, so we're protecting our knee health. Rear leg comes back, a little bit of a brace, so we're now creating stability between the hips and the torso, and we're going to rotate around and then back down again. Using our back foot as little as possible. So rotate around, knee stays over the toe, very little pressure through the back leg, rotate it around as far as you can so the hip and the torso move together, and then back down again. Now on this one, it's not about number of reps, it's about the quality of those reps. So I'd sooner you do 3 perfect repetitions than try and bang out 10 with really poor form. As you're getting towards the back end of those 10 reps, you're starting to fatigue, you're starting to lose concentration, and you're losing the focus of the exercise. In this movement, think of your ball and socket joints. And I want you to make sure that as you're going into your hip airplane position, you're going into that external rotation position, you imagine that the ball is touching all the edges and the corners of that hip socket. So that's piece number 3. Those are your hip airplanes. You're now ready to start your warm-up for your deadlift.